welcome to episode 12 of the Free Your Mind podcast.
We give way too much of a fuck about things that we shouldn't really give a fuck about. And because we give so much of a fuck about things that we shouldn't really give a fuck about, we don't have a lot of space for the things that we do give a fuck about, for the things that we do care about, for the things that do matter. And I wrote this on a status and someone asks, like, why do you think that is? Do you think it's learned behavior, or do you think it's, I think he said something like resistance to growth or something. I'm not sure. I can't remember now. It was relevant, but not relevant to my answer. We give a fuck because biologically, neuroscientifically, our brain thinks that we need to give a fuck about everything in order to survive. It thinks that, if I didn't give a fuck about the road, I walk out and I get run over. If I didn't give a fuck about the edge of a cliff, I fall off it. If I didn't give a fuck about reproducing, well, then we are wiped out as a human race. If I didn't give a fuck about the fact that the hob is hot, I melt my hand. And if I didn't give a fuck about that, I'd be like, ha, got a melted hand. It's not really going to serve us as humans from a biological level. So it's very easy to get caught giving a fuck about everything, especially if you've got a complicated life. If you've got staff or businesses or investments or properties or kids or jobs, rent, bills, all of that stuff. Like, all of a sudden we give a fuck about so much. Did I say the right thing to that person? Did I say the wrong thing to that person? Did I come across the right way? Did I write the right word? Am I saying the right words now? What happens if this happens and that happens? And what does it mean if I wear a green coat today instead of a red one? Or, if this business opportunity doesn't go through, or if I get sacked, or if I don't get the job, or if I do get the job, what does it mean? And what doesn't it mean? And what will this person think? And it's like, wow, our fucks are well and truly spent everywhere. And it takes up so much brain space that we forget to give a fuck about being alive. We forget to give a fuck about being present to the aliveness of life, to the wonders of life, the awe and wonder of life, the fact that we even exist. We forget to give less of a fuck and return back to that quiet space within where everything feels possible, where we just feel alive, where we feel calm, where life just feels, the simplest things in life just feel better. You have a cup of tea and it tastes like the best cup of tea you've ever had. And it's not even a good cup of tea. It's out of a flask or, it's not even good. But, so what I'm saying is, yes, it's normal. And for a lot of people, we've got trapped in the thinking that if we don't give a fuck, then things will go wrong. Yeah, but if I don't worry, then I'll drop the ball. If I'm not the one that's worrying about everyone else, then they won't worry about themselves, or they won't do X, Y, and Z, or they will drop the ball. If I'm not constantly thinking about all of the possible scenarios that may or may not go wrong, then we won't be prepared. It's like, you can get caught in this thinking of the more you worry, the more there is to worry about. The more problems you think you need to solve, the more problems you find that need solving. The more you feel you need to protect yourself against risk or, financial downturn, or before long, your head is so full of overthinking and what if scenarios and pessimism and complexity. And I struggled with this for a long time. Most of my clients do, until one day something drops and it clicks and I'm like, yes, at last. Sometimes it can take 10 minutes, sometimes an hour, sometimes months. It depends on the person, it depends on where they're at, it depends on their perception of life. It depends on how invested in their thinking. Unfortunately, I can't control when they have that insight, but when they have it, it's like, yeah, totally, you get that. Because ultimately what's happening is our biological need for survival just takes over. And if you don't see that for what that really is, and you believe that is really what is needed in order to be okay, then it makes sense to keep doing it. And you keep doing it and doing it and doing it. And eventually what normally happens is you realize you're stressed, or you're overweight, or your relationship's shit, or you've got all sorts of pains showing up. You can't sleep. You're acquiring health problems. Or even sometimes you just go, what is this all for? Like, I'm doing all of this, and I'm achieving, and I'm creating, and I'm acquiring the stuff, and everyone thinks I'm great, and my Insta looks like I am. But what the fuck is all this for? When do I get to be happy? Because ultimately, that's kind of what we're all looking for. Even if that sounds a bit melty, we're all really just looking to be happy in some way. And obviously, depending on your level of consciousness, you may be looking to fulfill certain... I can't find the words here. But if you're coming from a place of not enoughness, or you're trying to prove, or you're trying to make up for, things in the past, if you're trying to prove to yourself, if you're trying to prove to other people, if you're hoping that one day you'll feel good enough if you do X, Y, and Z, if you feel like an imposter and you're hoping that one day when you achieve X, Y, and Z, then you won't feel like an imposter, if you don't feel confident and you're kind of, if you're masking insecurities, well, that's a different conversation. But even that falls into this conversation, because do you know what all of this has in common? Thinking. Thoughts that have become real to you. Thoughts that are driving your behaviors consciously or unconsciously. And what I'm suggesting here is that if we transcend our thinking, I don't know if I like that word, because to me, it doesn't feel to me like it's above our thinking. It actually kind of feels like it's underneath it, if that makes any sense. It feels like that innate wisdom, that common sense, that aliveness of life. You may have felt it as a kid. You might have felt it as a teen. You may have felt it when you first started business. You may have felt it when you first went to uni or started a job, or first come out of school and got a job, whatever your journey is. You may remember a time where you just felt alive to life, where you felt everything was possible, where you didn't really worry about too much, and all you thought about was how great life could be and would be, and that's where your thoughts were. And you may notice the times that your thinking stopped, you felt most alive. The times that you were most on your game, where your thinking wasn't flying around in your head and there wasn't insecure thinking, and you didn't create thoughts of pressure or panic or worry. You had less to worry about, less to lose. A lot of people attribute that to a time in their life, but to me, it's not the time in their life. It just points to where their head was at. You've heard me say this before, but we live in the feeling of our thinking. Our feelings are just a barometer of our thoughts. You think, if you keep looking at all of the shit that could go wrong, how are you going to feel? Well, you're going to feel like anxious or worried, or like shit's going to go wrong. That's all gratitude is, the practice of gratitude. It's like if you think about all the things you're grateful for, do that enough times and you start to actually feel grateful. You start to feel abundant. You start to feel like, wow, my life's actually really good, and nothing's changed in that last 5 minutes. You've just gone from thinking everything's shit and falling apart to thinking everything's good and how grateful you are. That's the only difference. So we live in the feeling of our thinking. But the problem is so many people think that their thoughts are true, that because they think that we're going into recession and all their clients are going to leave, that really does make that true. So we really do need to act in a way to, flap around like a cat in a bath, panicking and scrambling to make sure that doesn't happen. Or I really do feel anxious if I'm on stage, so therefore I need to do everything I can to avoid that ever happening. Or, my wife really is going to leave me, so let me construct the finances in a way that she never can, or let me sprinkle her with cars and stuff so that she never leaves. I haven't done this, by the way, but these are just things I've seen. Again, it's either conscious or unconscious, and I laugh because it's funny, because when you see it, you're like, what the fuck? Is this really the best strategy? Like, is the best strategy to thrive? Is the best strategy to thrive really to panic and worry about all of the possible worst case scenarios? Is the best strategy to grow your business, really to spend all of your time looking at what could go wrong? You know, is your best strategy to grow, or if you're in a job, to get a better job or grow as a person, to keep looking at all of the parts of yourself that you aren't happy with, that aren't good enough, and all the things you need to do in order to be better? Again, if we go upstream here, if we chunk up from here, it is all just thinking. What is underneath your thinking? What happens when your head quietens down? When you become present to life? Because we all get a sense that the present moment is where life really is. What happens when you get present to life? What happens when you stop trying to run the world via your thinking? What happens when you stop trying to what happens when you stop trying to control the uncontrollable? When you stop thinking about so much. You may have to try it and let me know. I know, but you may need to find out for yourself. Does shit really go that wrong? Do the plates really smash? These thought-created plates, by the way. You know, the balls that you're juggling, which is just a metaphor to try and explain how you're feeling based on your thinking. Do you really drop them? Or does something else happen? Does life feel more full? The highs are higher, the lows are lower, but you're grateful for the highs and graceful in the lows. Do you start to notice inspiration comes through, and moment by moment intelligence comes through, and life feels more alive, and you're more present, and you start to actually enjoy it? When you're not looking to make life look a certain way so that you can feel a certain way, do you start to play the game more fully because you've got less to lose? And do you actually find yourself winning more because you're more present and alive to the game rather than present and alive to your thinking and all of the shit that's going on in your head? Like, I use sport a lot as a metaphor, but if you look at a footballer with a lot of shit going on in their personal life and a lot going on in their head, do they play better or worse? Worse. If you've got children, if they play sport, when they have got shit going on in their head, they're worrying about the game, or they're worrying about the pressure of it all, or they're worried they're going to X, Y, and Z, do they play better or worse? Generally worse. Is the same not true for life? You know, that as humans, we have this huge distrust in our ability to be present and navigate life turn by turn. We think that we need to predict constantly the future, either negatively, which creates anxiety, or positively, which creates excitement. Both are made up. Both are a lie. You can predict positively and life goes shit, but you're an optimist. You know, you keep predicting positively even though life's falling apart. Or you can predict negatively, live in the feeling of anxiety, and when it goes wrong, you're a realist. Or you can predict negatively, life goes right, and you go, well, it's because I'm a realist that I kept my eye on what could go wrong, you know. And when you're an optimist, you predict positively, and when life goes right, you go, yeah, it's because I'm positive. You're just making the whole fucking thing up, and that's great when you see that, if you see that. Because we don't need to make so much stuff up. We don't need to give so much of a shit about so much. The sun still rises, the planets still turn, your staff still do their job. You know, you'd be surprised at how much of your life still goes on. But when your capacity isn't taken up by all of the things you think are on your plate, when you realise half the stuff on your plate isn't really on your plate, you can't control it anyway, you can clear your plate and you have so much more capacity to do cool shit, to be more alive to your best self. That sounds cringy, but to the best version of yourself, to be more alive to life, to be more present to solutions and opportunities and growth, and more present in conversations where you really hear the other person rather than listen, walk off and forget what they said, or ask their name and walk off and forget what their name was. Or your wife gives you a shopping list, you walk out the room and you come back in and realize you didn't listen to any of it. You know, or you get to Friday and you don't even remember living the last 5 days. So I guess I'm inviting you, as always, to just look beyond Your thinking, there's a whole world outside of your thinking. And you either, on some level, there's a feeling in you right now that knows that on some level this is true, or set aside your argumentative mind for a moment and just give this a test. I'm not here to be right. Prove me wrong. I don't mind. Go try it. See what happens when you clear the decks of all of the made up problems that you think you have, when you stop giving so much of a shit about things you don't need to give a shit about. See what happens. See how life feels. See if life just feels fuller, more alive. See if you perform better. See if your capacity increases. See if your capacity to deal with problems and stress increases. See if your inspiration, ideas, problem solving, joy, humor, happiness comes to the surface, and see what impact does that make on your life. Because we think that giving less of a shit would mean our life declines, but I've never once seen that to be true. And I was the most skeptical person around. I didn't get this for years, so I don't blame you if you don't. But try it. Anyway, pleasure as always. Yeah, it's I enjoy this conversation. Hopefully you enjoy it as much as I do. Something about these conversations just seem to wake up a part of ourselves that already knows this isn't about me and my voice, and it's about me attempting to point in the direction of something you already know. And I think if you look for that good feeling, there's a part of you that the thoughts might be arguing against me or trying to figure this out, but there's usually a deeper part of you, a feeling part of you, that an intuitive gut feeling part of you that goes, yeah, there might be something in this, And that's often enough. That's often enough. That, maybe life isn't quite how I think it is. That's often enough. So if you feel that, cool. If you're totally with me, that's awesome. If you are not getting this, that's cool too. It's all part of the game. And the final caveat to this, I guess, is life seems to me like we fall asleep. We kind of get sucked down the rabbit hole of life into the nightmares. Sometimes they're good dreams, sometimes they're nightmares. And then we seem to wake up. And we, on some level, recognize that we've been sucked into our thinking. We've been sucked down the rabbit hole. We've got caught up in the bullshit. And we suddenly just wake up from it and go, fucking hell, where have I been? Where's the week gone? Why did I care so much? And inevitably we get sucked back down again. That seems to be the nature of the game. That seems to just be the way that the game is played. It looks like that happens less and less the more you look in this direction, but I don't know how you quantify that. So I guess what I'm saying is you will get sucked in. That's cool. You may come along and listen to a podcast like this, which wakes you up again, and you go, fucking hell, I'm back again, I'm alive again. And then a day later, an hour later, a week later, you might get sucked down it again, and that's cool. That's just part of the process. But if every time you wake up, you will notice more, you'll see more, and you will then advance to the next levels anyway. So as you conquer level 4 of life, you then kind of move to level 5. And as you conquer level 5, you'll probably find yourself playing level 6. And then you might get stuck at level 6 for a bit until you see something new. And then you play level 7. And I think that's part of the game too. People like us want to keep evolving, growing, experiencing life. It's one thing to know, a private jet's not going to make me happy, but it's another thing to actually get on the private jet and go, yeah, actually, this isn't as good as I thought it would be. I don't want a private jet, by the way, but it's an extreme example. We seem to want to experience the fullness of life, and we will do that, but we can do that whilst feeling like shit and like, what's the point of it all, and miserable and depressed and sedating ourselves, or we can enjoy the game. How much better would that be, if we just enjoyed... there's even joy in losing sometimes, you can, the joy in losing is when you win again, it feels so much sweeter, that life can be, but for our thinking, the whole thing can just feel very full and alive and enjoyable. Anyway, I'm flying off on another tangent, so let me wrap it up there, just under 20 minutes. I appreciate you listening, I really do, and if you've shared this with people, which I know a lot of you have, if you left reviews, again, I love that, because it's just a great conversation to be a part of, really. So it seems to make a difference, not only to my life, but to clients' lives and people that listen. So That's pretty cool. And as you know, that's not about me. I'm not so silly to think that this is about how great I am anymore. It's just about how great humans are once we wake up to what and who we really are. So anyway, have a good one. I'll speak to you soon.